Hello, everybody. Mr. McCulley, coming back to you for the second part of Unit 2 in the new framework. This is all about states of consciousness and the sleep cycle. We're going to get started with Unit 22, understanding consciousness and hypnosis. So let's get started. All right. So in this module, we have 3 learning targets. We're going to look at the place of consciousness in psychology's history, from the beginning of modern psychology in the late 1800s to today. We're going to define hypnosis and talk about how a hypnotist can influence or not influence a hypnotized subject. And we're going to talk about whether or not hypnosis is an extension of normal consciousness or if it is an altered state. So let's start off with some 2 early prominent psychologists, and let's look at what they thought about hypnosis. William James, an early psychologist that was credited with the founding of functionalism. He basically viewed consciousness as this stream or river, and basically he felt that consciousness was something that we just kind of absorbed as we experienced it almost simultaneously. Again, James was the founder of functionalism. Functionalism, much like structuralism, kind of died off because they were trying to measure things like consciousness, like perceptions, and at that time, we didn't have the scientific instruments to measure any of that. But down the road, we will. Freud, on the other hand, felt that our unconscious mind was a place to hide all of our deep, dark, animalistic urges, our wanton lust, and oftentimes he felt that that was linked to childhood experiences, whether they be good or bad. Okay, so basically what happens is this. The first 2 schools of thought kind of entertain this idea of consciousness, but they don't have the ability to prove any of it. And remember, the third school of psychology was behavioralism, and behavioralists were kind of a response to the flaws of structuralism and functionalism. And behavioralists basically said, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. We don't care about consciousness. We don't care about cognitive process. We don't care about perception. We don't care about emotion. We care about stuff that we can see and we can document. Okay, they don't care about any of the stuff, any of the cognitive processes that goes on. But in the 1960s, shortly after the revisiting of humanist psychology, Maslow and Carl Rogers, what we see a cognitive revolution in the 60s. And basically, this is kind of a rebirth of this concept of a conscious. It's a field of psychology that begins to accrue more data, kind of through humanism. And basically, psychologists in the field in the 50s and 60s basically say, hey, we're not taking into account this underlying element of the consciousness. So in the 1960s, we see the idea of a consciousness come back, and it pretty much remains as a integral part of psychology, even through to this day. Okay, so what is consciousness? Consciousness is basically our awareness of ourselves and our environment. It's basically one part of what we call dual processing of our 2-track minds. Dual processing basically means that we can process things consciously and unconsciously. And I think I've given you guys the example multiple times. It's kind of like when you're sitting there in class and I'm teaching you about psychology, your body also is keeping you alive by processing the air in your lungs and pumping blood through your veins. It's a situation where you don't have to think about some of those things. All right, so it basically boils down to an equation. How much of what is going on is aware to us or consciously aware, or how much of it is unconscious or unconsciously aware? All right, let's look at hypnosis. Hypnosis is a social interaction between 2 people, a hypnotist and a subject. And basically what we see in the state of hypnosis, if it is possible, we see certain perceptions, feelings, and thoughts and behaviors occurring spontaneously, meaning that they're kind of coming out without any prompt, or they're happening within a few seconds. Sometime the hypnotist will be trying to uh, unearth certain things, certain ideas, certain feelings, and the subject will spontaneously realize, hey, oh yeah, I do kind of feel this way, or yeah, I was thinking of that. All right, let's talk about altered states of consciousness. This is any state in which we are not fully aware, fully lucid, fully conscious, okay, or under the influence of some sort of hallucinogenic. All right, so let's look at some of these states. First, daydreaming. We've all been there, all right? Daydreaming is a spontaneous occurrence, oftentimes when we're tired or we're incredibly bored. Um, Drowsiness, another spontaneous case of altered consciousness. This is where we get really tired and kind of drowse off. We kind of doze off. And then also dreaming. Dreaming is considered to be an altered state of consciousness. Okay. Physiologically induced altered states. Hallucinations. Hallucinations can be brought on by drugs, alcohol. They can also be brought on by mental disorders such as schizophrenia. Orgasm is also an altered state of consciousness. And obviously, this is brought on by intimate contact. Enough said about that. We also see physiological altered states produced out of deprivation. So food or oxygen deprivation oftentimes can throw people into an altered state. And this is if something happens for long enough. If you go without food for a few days or you go without oxygen, you can start to see and hear things. If you've ever, been trying to hold your breath, sometimes you'll see stars. All right. If you take that longer, you kind of fall into this altered state of physiological consciousness. Psychologically induced altered states, sensory deprivation. This is basically where you're put in an antechamber, is what it's called, and basically you're deprived of most of your senses. You might not have any light. You might not. It might be soundproof. Some treatments today, you can actually go to a spa and go to what they call a zero grav chamber. And it's basically where you float on a pool of water or salt water. And that salt water is meant to mimic your body temperature. And it can be very soothing for a short period of time. But if you're left in that setting for long enough, you can actually fall into an altered state. And then hypnosis as well as meditation. Both of these can induce psychological states of altered consciousness. Okay, so let's talk about hypnosis and how frequent it is. Excuse me. Basically, I think I told you guys in class that about 2 out of 10 people are easily hypnotizable or highly hypnotizable. It means that they are suggestible to the extent they want to be good hypnotic subjects. Children, for the most part, are much more apt to be highly suggestible. This is also why we have to be careful what we have kids testify to in courts of law, because the mind of a child is not fully solidified in terms of its understanding. So we have to be very careful how we handle children, especially, like I said, when they're giving testimony in court of law. Can you recall forgotten events? Can we put you in a chair and put you under hypnosis and have you go back and relive events? Not really. There's a lot of studies that have been done with this. Now, that being said, it's not to say that you can't put somebody under hypnosis and that person might remember a few additional details to a particular event. And a lot of people believe, they have this false belief that under hypnosis you can go back and access the photographic aspect of your memory, and that's not really true. We do, in a way, kind of have a photographic memory, but the problem is that part of our perceptive process, we actually dump most of that information right when it enters into our memory, and we don't have the ability to store all of everything that we ever interpret or ever perceive. So a lot of it's dumped. It's not really stored in our memory banks. Okay, we do see memories from time to time being retrieved through hypnosis, but a lot of times, guys, there's a large portion of fiction. When we get into our memory unit, we'll talk about how our mind has a tendency to plug in falsities just because we think it makes more sense. And it's gonna rock your world a little bit because you're gonna realize that what you actually perceive isn't always what is actually there. Okay, post hypnotic suggestions. So, again, the desire for people to want to change has to be there first and foremost. Post hypnotic suggestions are basically suggestions made from a hypnotist to a subject, and they are designed to help change the behavioral patterns or perceptions of that subject. Highly effective when it comes to weight loss, highly effective when it comes to uh, relieving stress, not really effective when it comes to alcohol, tobacco, drug addiction. And there's a reason for that. The first two, stress and weight loss, people have a strong desire to not want to be stressed or to not want to be obese or to be heavy. So there's already built-in suggestibility. So if that makes sense, there's a willingness there. Now, people that struggle with drugs, alcohol, etc., nicotine, there is a desire initially, usually, but there's a physiological addiction that has to be overcome. So the success rates of using hypnosis to correct those types of problems is far less than dealing with stress, weight loss, and possibly anxiety. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Can you be forced to act against your will? Not really. A lot of people think that you can be hypnotized into this zombie-like trance and you can go, carry out some murder and have no knowledge of it. That really doesn't happen. The only time that even gets close to happening is when you have an incredibly highly suggestible subject, um, and that subject has such a high level of willingness that they will pretty much do anything, but it's not necessarily because of the hypnosis. It's because of the fact they want to be a good subject. It's not because they want to. It's not because they are under hypnosis. So I hope that makes sense. Hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is basically just uh, a job that hypnotists will take a person that wants to get better in some aspect of their life, and they will use multiple sessions, and they will hypnotize the person. Again, highly effective when it comes to obesity, highly effective when it comes to anxiety, and stress, just because of the fact that people have a strong willingness to not be in those states, and it's a more deep rooted want and determination. Okay, so let's take a look here. Overall, what can we learn from hypnosis? Um, Basically, when you take hypnotherapy and you have a subject that is highly suggestible or that has a strong desire, like somebody that wants to lose some weight, um, on average, when hypnosis is coupled with other therapies and positive reinforcement with the subject, we see an increase of almost 70%. So hypnosis by itself is not going to be hugely effective. But if you take hypnosis and you couple it with group therapy, you couple it with individual counseling, your success rates can drastically go up. Again, you have that willingness of the subject you have to take into account. Like I said earlier, highly effective for the treatment of obesity and for a lot of people stress as well. And again, drug, alcohol, smoking, not so much. All right. So, can hypnosis relieve pain? Yes, for a little bit. There was a study done, and in this study, people were hypnotized, and then they were put into their arms were placed into an ice bath, and the idea was that they had been hypnotized that there was no pain, was no pain, was no pain, and that actually had some effect on them. The studies at least said that. And then after about 25 to 30 seconds, that effect wore off, and the people began to feel that really frigid, cold water on their arm. So again, hypnosis does work, but only to an extent. Okay. So is hypnosis an extension of normal consciousness? So social influence theory basically says that we want to act like good subjects. So what that means is people that are participating in hypnosis become, AKA in quotes, hypnotized because of the fact that they want to be hypnotized. In reality, are they hypnotized? It's very hard to say, because we have underlying desires that, we want to be people pleasers, and for some people it's far better, or far stronger, I should say, than others. Again, highly suggestible versus not highly suggestible, but you will need to know social influence theory. Okay, basically, we just want to be good subjects, therefore we are much more likely to fall into a trance, all right, or become, AKA, hypnotized. All right, Ernest Hildegard. Hildegard, basically, he was the guy that did the ice bath, um, and he came up with this theory, and it's called, basically, dual processing. And he comes up with this term called dissociation, where he felt that our consciousness could actually split. And a lot of psychologists kind of believe this, because if you look at our daily processes, we can be thinking about the weather or the presidential election, and on the other hand, we're also doing all of those automatic bodily processes that we don't have to think about. So again, dissociation is a thing. Now, how it plays into hypnosis, well, I shouldn't say dissociation is a thing. I should say that a two-track mind and dual processing is definitely a thing. Is it possible for us to fall into a dissociative state? Sure, for some of us. Some of us possibly not. And again, he was the one that carried out the ice bath, and like we already talked about. So again, he felt that there was a benefit to hypnosis. He felt that it did have an effect, and he did feel that once you were under hypnosis, and you can see the woman here putting her arm in this ice bath, when you were hypnotized or you fell into a hypnotic state, you became dissociated, where basically you had a conscious mind and then an unconscious mind, or an altered state, let's say, where you could be suggested to not feel pain in this case. Okay, so again, the big question is this: are we just trying to be well-behaved subjects, socially acceptable subjects, or is it actually a dissociated mind? Are we experiencing full dissociation, or are we just trying to be good subjects, people that are daydreaming in class? Is it really falling into an altered state, or is it just our mind's way of kind of taking a break? Those are kind of questions that science still wrestles with today. All right, biopsychosocial. We're going to let you guys take a look at that on your own. And that's going to do it for Module 22. Stay tuned for Module 23. See you soon.